And Turkey's president says the Netherlands will pay a price as relations between the two countries continue to deteriorate. We just want to show you these live pictures that are coming into a Sky Centre of a rally that has taken place where the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has been speaking. He said that the Netherlands would pay a high price. It comes after this escalating diplomatic row continues between Turkey and the Netherlands after the Netherlands stopped two Turkish officials attempting to address crowds in the Netherlands. Let's talk to our guest who can give us a bit more on this and unpick what is actually taking place in Turkey and also in the Netherlands. That is Michael Daventry, the editor of Huber, a Turkish newspaper based in London. Many thanks indeed for joining us this lunchtime. So if you will, just unravel for us, for our viewers, exactly what is taking place in Turkey and the Netherlands and why this diplomatic spat is now escalating.
Well, in my view, there are two aspects to it. The first is that you've got this incredible scenes of violence that happened overnight on the streets of Rotterdam, and the foreign minister, the Turkish foreign minister, tweeted images of protesters being attacked by dogs, which was quite violent. But if you take the violence, which was very grim, to one side, the second point is that there are two elections happening in two countries. The Dutch have got an election on Wednesday. The Turks have got a major referendum happening next month. And there are people in the Netherlands who can vote in both of those elections. The spat comes from a dispute over how to canvass, how to campaign for both of those electorates.
So is there any indication that, or is there every indication that this isn't going to go away anytime soon because you've got the timing of these elections? You've got the referendum taking place in April in Turkey. You've got the elections taking place in the Netherlands this week. Both parties here aren't going to want to be seen to be backing down, especially if you look at what's going on in the Netherlands. Geert Wilders and his far-right party, they seem to be making ground. So it's one of those that this is going to continue in the coming weeks ahead up until there is a final conclusion.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I'm not an expert on Dutch politics, but immigration has been a clear issue in Holland and in other countries as well. I do know a lot about what's been happening in Turkey, and I know that the Turkish Prime Minister, Binali Yildirim, was on Turkish national television about a week ago, and he said that they would not be campaigning in the Netherlands until the Dutch general election was out of the way on Wednesday. The fact remains that Turkey could have opted to simply say, you know what, there's a domestic election going on, our election isn't going to happen for another 2 or 3 weeks. We can do our campaigning once the Dutch election is out of the way. But they chose not to do that. And the reason they chose not to do that is because Turkish politics, Turkish nationalist politics, goes down very well with voters in Turkey. So you'll see even the Turkish opposition leader has put out a statement only in the last hour or so to say we should completely end our diplomatic ties or suspend them between Turkey and the Netherlands. They're all jumping onto this nationalist bandwagon because they all want to be seen as defending Turkey's interests.
And what about rallies being held in other European countries, in Sweden, in France, in Germany, for example? Are we likely to see these countries following suit as well, and that nationalist further in Turkey continuing as a result?
It's a mixed picture, really. I mean, there were rallies and attempts to do rallies in Germany, which were blocked by local authorities there. And there was a story which I haven't been able to confirm about a hall in Sweden being blocked, like you mentioned. But I mean, my newspaper, Haber, interviewed or rather spoke briefly to one of the ministers here in the UK, Greg Hans, and he said that he saw no reason why there should be an obstacle to allow Turkish ministers to canvass the 80,000 registered Turkish voters in this country. The point is that it works very well for President Erdogan and for Turkish politicians to be seen to be defending Turkey's interests. This is what's been happening with the spat with the Netherlands at the moment.
What does President Erdogan mean when he says there will be a high price? And immediately it strikes me that is he saber-rattling over the whole the agreements over migrants, because he's getting money, at least Turkey's receiving money from the European Union in order to stem the flow of migrants entering into Europe. Is he basically saying here that if these rallies aren't allowed to happen, if this spat continues, then effectively I'm going to open up the floodgates and there'll be another 1 million migrants arriving into Europe?
It's very possible. It certainly happened before. They've made those threats before. And the foreign minister only about a week ago was actually saying that if the European Union countries, the ones that adopt the Schengen Agreement, don't grant visa-free access to Turkish citizens, which is something Turkey has wanted for many, many years, then the foreign minister said that they would completely cancel that migrant agreement. But at the moment, it's always very difficult with President Erdogan to guess whether or not he's making a policy statement or whether he's playing to the electorate. And the fact that there is this divisive referendum, which, by the way, nobody is talking about, feeds into the fact that that there is simply going to be, it could just simply be nationalist rhetoric.
And just finally, I mean, what effect is this going to have on NATO? I mean, these are two allies in the treaty organisation, and you've got words being exchanged here that seem to be unheard of. A Nazi remnants, fascists, that one country's going to pay a high price.
It's interesting how NATO comes up in conversation, because the reason Turkey was in NATO or brought into NATO back in the 50s was so that a country that was so strategically close to what is then the Soviet Union could be firmly rooted into the West. And Turkey now is playing a very close game with Russia. So it's the NATO element of it is very difficult to predict. What I would say is that all of these arguments, all of these debates have completely overlooked the fact that the Turkish people are going to be voting next month in a referendum to grant President Erdogan sweeping amounts of power, and nobody's really talking about that at the moment.
Okay, Michael Daventry, many thanks indeed for your analysis.